Snow White. Chapter 1, The Queen's Winter Wish. The castle sat quiet and still beneath a heavy blanket of snow. Outside, the world was cold, silent, and glistening under a silver sky. Winter had come early that year, and with it came a strange sense of stillness, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Inside the royal chamber, a queen sat at a tall arched window, watching snowflakes drift gently onto the sill. Her fingers, pale and delicate, stitched thread into a piece of embroidery, a white rose surrounded by red thorns. As she sewed, a needle slipped and pricked her finger. A single drop of crimson blood landed on the snowy embroidery. She gazed at the contrast, the red so vibrant against the white, and whispered her secret wish. If only I could have a daughter, with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as the ebony of this window frame. That night, as the snow continued to fall, her wish fluttered up into the heavens like a prayer. A month passed, and then another. The queen, once tired and frail, began to glow with a quiet joy. Soon it was clear, her wish had come true. She was with child. The entire kingdom rejoiced. Snow was still covering the land when the baby was born, and as the queen had wished, the child had skin as pale as winter, lips like crimson berries, and hair as black as midnight. She named her Snow White. But joy is often fleeting. Only days after Snow White's birth, the queen grew weak. The warmth faded from her cheeks, and her light slowly dimmed. She held her child one last time and whispered, "You are my wish come true. Be strong, my snowflower." With a final breath, the queen was gone. The king was heartbroken. The castle that once sang with joy fell silent again. Snow White, a tiny bundle of life, was now motherless in a cold and quiet world. But the child, so small and so gentle, held a strange kind of light within her. A light the kingdom hadn't seen in years. Chapter 2. A child of snow and sorrow. The castle never quite recovered from the queen's passing. The once bright halls were now quieter, and the servants walked with softer steps. Every corridor echoed with memories of laughter that no longer danced through the air. In the nursery, the child, Snow White, slept soundly, untouched by the sadness that filled the stone walls. The king, though consumed with grief, tried to raise his daughter with gentleness. He would cradle her in his arms at dusk, telling her stories of her mother's kindness, her grace, and her final wish. Snow White grew under his care, loved deeply, and shielded from the sorrow that had once shadowed her first breaths. But even a good king can be vulnerable to time and loneliness. As Snow White grew into a bright and beautiful girl, the king began to feel the weight of ruling. The new queen was indeed beautiful. Her name was Queen Eveline, a woman cloaked in mystery. She came from distant lands, draped in black velvet and silver lace, her hair twisted high like a crown. Her eyes shimmered like polished onyx, cold, calculating, and watchful. Rumors followed her like shadows, whispering of strange charms and ancient secrets. To the public, she was poised and regal. But inside the castle walls, the queen grew distant and stern. She rarely spoke to Snow White and watched her only with narrowed eyes, as if calculating her every move. The queen possessed a strange relic, one that none but her dared to touch, a tall, oval mirror framed in dark wood, covered by a deep velvet cloth. The servants whispered about it. They said she spoke to it at night. They said the mirror spoke back. And indeed, it did. Every night, after the halls were still and the fires dimmed, the queen would enter her private chamber, uncover the mirror, and whisper with an eerie calm. "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And the mirror, bound by magic older than the castle itself, would always answer, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." At first, this pleased her. She would smile, tilt her head, and move on with her day. But as Snow White's beauty began to bloom, quietly, like a spring flower beneath snow, the queen began to feel a chill in her heart. It was the chill of jealousy. Chapter 3, The Mirror's Answer. The years passed, and Snow White grew like the dawn, gently but unmistakably radiant. Her skin glowed like pearl, her eyes held a spark of kindness, and her laughter was as soft as chimes in spring. Every passer-by in the kingdom admired the princess's beauty, but more than that, they admired her heart. She often wandered into the gardens to sing to the birds and help the gardeners pick herbs. She treated the maids with the same respect she gave the nobility. It was this kindness, so pure and effortless, that made her truly loved. But the queen saw none of that. All she saw was a growing threat. At first, Queen Eveline tried to ignore her. But her jealousy gnawed at her like moths in silk. Snow White's presence began to feel like a spotlight that dimmed her own shine. She became increasingly withdrawn, spending hours in front of her mirror, seeking validation for her beauty and power. One moonless night, draped in her velvet robe, she stood once more before the mirror, her voice slow and certain. "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" For the first time, the mirror did not answer immediately. A low, eerie hum filled the room. The queen's eyes narrowed. Then, the voice echoed, still calm, but changed. "You, my queen, were fair of grace. But Snow White now holds beauty's face." Eveline's heart stopped. "What?" she hissed, her voice sharp with disbelief. The mirror pulsed again, its silver surface swirling like mist. The voice repeated. "Her heart is light, her soul is true. The fairest now, is not you." The queen recoiled. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the mirror's edge. For the first time in years, fear wrapped around her pride. She paced the floor like a caged animal. How could it be? She had ruled over this kingdom, over beauty, over every mirror and reflection. How dare this girl take that from her? And that's when the queen's envy turned to hatred. She could not bear the idea of being second. Not even to a child. That night, under a sky hidden by storm clouds, Queen Eveline summoned her most trusted huntsman. A tall man with eyes that had seen war and hands that had carried out darker commands. She gave a single order, her voice like ice. "Take her into the forest. Do not let her return. Bring me proof that she will never again be the fairest." Chapter 4, A Command in the Dark. The next morning dawned gray and damp, with low fog curling through the castle corridors like creeping fingers. Snow White awoke to a soft knock on her chamber door. The queen's huntsman stood there, silent and unsmiling. "Your Highness," he said, bowing low. "The queen requests that you join me for a walk in the royal forest. She says the fresh air will do you well." Snow White tilted her head, surprised but delighted. "Truly? I haven't been beyond the gates in." She dressed quickly, wrapping herself in a deep blue cloak, and followed the huntsman past the towering iron gates. As they entered the forest, Snow White's eyes lit up. She admired the blooming snowdrops, stroked the mossy trunks of ancient trees, and knelt to whisper to a rabbit hidden in a clump of ivy. But the huntsman did not smile. He walked beside her in silence, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger. As they reached the heart of the woods, the trees grew taller and denser, letting in only splinters of light. Snow White paused beside a sparkling stream, crouching to dip her fingers into the cool water. When she looked back, the huntsman's face was pale, his eyes filled with dread. "You've gone quiet," she said gently. "Is something troubling you?" He did not answer at first. Then, slowly, he drew the dagger from his belt. Snow White gasped and stepped back, her hand flying to her chest. I'm sorry, he said, his voice thick with guilt. I was sent here to kill you. I was ordered, by the queen. Snow White's eyes widened, not with fear, but sorrow. Then, I suppose you must do what your queen asks. The huntsman froze. He had expected her to scream, to run, to beg. But she didn't. She stood there like the winter itself, still, beautiful, and dignified. And he could not do it. With shaking hands, he dropped the dagger into the leaves. Run, he whispered. Run far from here. Don't ever come back. But she'll know. He reached into the satchel at his belt and pulled out a small box. I'll bring her proof. A trick, a heart from the forest. She won't know. Go, princess. Go before I change my mind. Snow White nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. She turned and fled deeper into the forest, her blue cloak trailing like a ribbon behind her. The huntsman watched until she disappeared, then fell to his knees, unsure whether he'd just saved a life, or sealed his own fate. Chapter 5, Deep in the Forest. Snow White ran until her legs trembled and her breath came in sharp bursts. Branches scratched at her arms, and roots threatened to trip her, but she didn't stop. The further she fled, the darker and more tangled the forest became. Daylight faded beneath the canopy, and silence pressed in like a second skin. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear. She collapsed beside a mossy log, her blue cloak torn and streaked with leaves and soil. Her hands trembled. The huntsman's words echoed in her ears. She ordered your death. The queen, who had once seemed distant but harmless, had now revealed her true heart. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself to stand. She could not give in, not now. She was alive. And she needed to stay that way. Snow White wandered deeper still, past thorny bushes and creaking trees. Strange sounds echoed, owls hooting, unseen rustlings in the leaves, but nothing harmed her. It was as if the forest itself had accepted her presence. Just as night fell, she spotted something unusual, a small clearing lit by fireflies and moonlight. In the middle stood a tiny cottage, its roof covered in moss and its windows glowing softly. It looked magical. She approached cautiously and knocked. No answer. Hello, she called. Is anyone there? Silence. The door creaked open at her touch. Inside, the cottage was clean and cozy, though peculiar. Everything was small, chairs, plates, beds, all made for people much shorter than her. Still, Snow White was grateful. She curled up on a tiny bed, her head resting gently against a patchwork quilt. For the first time in days, she felt warmth. What she didn't know was that this cottage was not empty for long. It belonged to 7 dwarfs, miners of gemstones and keepers of the forest's ancient secrets. And they were due to return at sunrise. Chapter 6, The 7 Protectors. The sun rose lazily over the treetops, casting golden beams through the windows of the little cottage. Birds chirped in the canopy above, and deep beneath the earth, the sound of pickaxes grew faint. It was the dwarfs making their way home. They were an odd but cheerful group. Bramble, the unofficial leader, serious and wise. Mary, who whistled songs with every step. Thistle, the quiet thinker. Nugget, always hungry and curious. Twig, who tripped over everything but never stopped talking. Dusty, who sneezed every time he saw flowers. And Wink, the sleepy one who dozed even while walking. As they approached their cottage nestled in the heart of the forest, something felt different. The birds were too quiet. The wind too still. Bramble raised his hand. Hold. Something's inside. They tiptoed in, expecting a raccoon or a forest thief. Instead, they found a girl asleep on Wink's bed, curled up like a fallen petal. Her dark hair spilled over the pillow, and her skin seemed to glow in the morning light. "She's beautiful," whispered Mary. "She's in my bed," muttered Wink, yawning. Just then, Snow White stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she looked frightened. Then she saw their kind faces, filled not with suspicion, but curiosity. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, standing quickly. I didn't mean to intrude. I was lost and tired, Anne." Her voice trembled, and Bramble raised a hand gently. "You are safe now." "But who are you, child, and how came you to our doorstep?" Snow White took a breath and told them everything, about her father, the cruel queen, the huntsman, and her escape through the forest. The dwarfs listened in silence, their small faces grave. At the end, Thistle spoke softly. "Then she means to kill you." Dusty sneezed. "We can't let that happen." Bramble nodded. "You may stay here with us, Princess. You'll be safe, as long as you remain hidden." "Thank you," she whispered, eyes welling with gratitude. And from that day, the cottage was her new home. She cooked for them, cleaned their small abode, and in return, they brought her stories, laughter, and protection. But far away, in the cold tower of the castle, Queen Eveline once again stood before her mirror. "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And this time, the mirror's voice sent a chill through her bones. "You, my queen, are fair, it's true. But Snow White lives, beyond your view. Deep in the forest, safe she lies. And still her beauty never dies." The queen's eyes blazed with fury. "The girl lives." And Eveline would not rest until that changed. Chapter 7: The Queen's Disguise. The queen's chamber pulsed with rage. She paced in front of her mirror, hands clenched into trembling fists. Her nails scraped across the surface of the vanity as she hissed. "She lives. After all I've done, she still lives?" The mirror's glow dimmed, as if even it feared her fury. Eveline turned, her eyes alight with wicked purpose. "If the huntsman cannot do what I ask, then I shall do it myself." Down into the hidden depths of the castle she went, into the forbidden wing, behind an iron door sealed with old magic. This was her sanctum, where ancient books and enchanted relics slept beneath layers of dust and cobwebs. She opened a black velvet tome, its pages written in curling silver ink. It spoke of transformations, of masks and magic that twisted the face, bent the voice, and cloaked the soul. From a drawer, she removed a vial of midnight purple liquid and a delicate raven feather. Chanting under her breath, she dipped the feather into the elixir and traced it across her face. Her elegant features began to ripple like water in a storm. Her silky black hair coiled into graying frizz. Her smooth skin puckered and wrinkled. Her slender hands curled into crow. And when she looked into the mirror again, the face that stared back was no longer regal or beautiful, it was that of an old peddler woman, hunched, hollow-eyed, and harmless seeming. But her eyes, oh, her eyes, still burned with cruel intelligence. "Let her trust the old and weak," she croaked, voice now rough with age. "Let her open her door with kindness, and swallow her death with innocence." She gathered herbs, pouches, and finally, a single crimson apple. Its skin gleamed unnaturally bright. She whispered the spell into it, an ancient curse that would still a heartbeat with just one bite. "Sweet as honey," she muttered, admiring her work. "And deadly as my hatred." Clutching the basket close, the disguised queen wrapped herself in a faded brown cloak. With slow, careful steps, she vanished into the woods. Far ahead, nestled among whispering trees and laughter, the cottage still sang with joy. Snow White danced with the birds and swept the floors with song. She had no idea that evil was coming, wearing the face of an old woman and holding a gift in her hand. Chapter 8, A Bite of Fate. It was a quiet morning in the forest cottage. Sunlight filtered through the windows as Snow White sang softly while baking berry tarts. The dwarfs had left early for the gem mines, whistling their way through the forest paths. Before they left, Bramble had warned, as he always did. "Don't open the door to strangers, Snow. The Queen's shadow still lingers." She had nodded, heart warm with their care. But deep in the woods, unseen by the trees or birds, a crooked figure crept closer, leaning on a gnarled cane, her step slow and deliberate. The Queen, in her disguise, reached the edge of the clearing and saw the cottage ahead, just as she had seen it in her magic mirror. She smiled. Meanwhile, inside, Snow White removed the last tart from the oven. The scent of vanilla and berries filled the air. Just as she set the tray down, there came a knock at the door, light, almost pitiful. "Knock, knock. Who is it?" Snow called gently. A raspy voice replied, "Just an old woman, my dear. A peddler of sweet apples. Might you spare a cup of water for my weary bones?" Snow White hesitated. The dwarf's warning echoed in her mind. But she peeked out through the wooden shutters. Outside, stood a frail old woman, hunched and trembling, her hands curled around a small basket of apples. She looked harmless. Snow bit her lip. "Just a moment." She opened the door a crack and offered a cup of water through the gap. The disguised Queen sipped it, coughing slightly. "Ah, thank you, child. Such kindness is rare these days. Let me leave you something sweet in return." From her basket, she drew the reddest apple Snow White had ever seen. It shimmered with dew, its skin flawless, almost glowing. "One bite, and all your worries melt away," said the old woman with a tired smile. Snow hesitated again. "I'm not really hungry. Just a taste, my dear. You remind me of my granddaughter, she loved apples." Snow White looked into the old woman's eyes and saw what she thought was warmth. Her own kind heart overpowered caution. She took the apple. She smiled. And she bit. The moment her teeth sank into the fruit, the world shifted. The taste, once sweet, turned bitter. Her vision blurred. The apple fell from her hand and hit the wooden floor with a dull thud. Her knees buckled. The Queen stepped back, her disguise unraveling slightly in the flicker of candlelight. Snow White collapsed, her lashes fluttering once, twice, then still. The Queen let out a low, victorious whisper, "Now, little dove, you'll sleep forever." With a cruel laugh, she vanished into the forest shadows, leaving behind a silent cottage, a fallen apple, and a girl whose beauty now lay locked in a death-like slumber. Chapter 9, A Forest in Mourning. The forest, once alive with laughter and birdsong, fell into an eerie stillness. When the 7 dwarfs returned from the mines, they noticed the silence first. No smoke from the chimney. No humming echoing through the trees. No Snow White at the window, waving eagerly. Their footsteps quickened. Bramble was the first to reach the door, his heart thudding heavily in his chest. He pushed it open. And there she was. Snow White. Lying still on the floor, her skin pale as moonlight, lips red as blood, and her hands delicately folded near a crimson apple. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Twig fell to his knees, sobbing. No, she was just here this morning. She was laughing." Mary collapsed against the wall, his hat in his hands. Dusty sneezed, even through his tears. she didn't. Listen, she must have opened the door. Bramble knelt beside her. He touched her wrist. No pulse. Her breath, gone. But, her body was untouched by death. No stiffness. No decay. Her beauty remained, as though she were only sleeping. A sleeping curse, Thistle whispered, picking up the bitten apple. A spell so cruel it mimics death, and only the rarest of magics can undo it. Wink wiped his eyes. Then she's not truly gone? Not entirely, said Bramble. But we cannot break this curse. They built her a glass coffin with their own hands, using the finest crystals from the mine. They placed her gently inside, beneath the open sky, where sunlight could still kiss her cheeks and the moon could watch over her. Animals came from all corners of the forest. Deer stood beside rabbits. Birds lined the branches above. Even the wind seemed to hush in mourning. Days passed. Then weeks. Each day, the dwarfs would visit. They would sing to her. Tell her stories. Lay flowers by the coffin's side. Hope lived in their hearts, though it grew fainter with each sunrise. She saved us, even as we tried to protect her, Bramble would whisper. Now all we can do is wait. But somewhere beyond the mountains, fate stirred again, quiet and unseen. For Snow White's story was not yet over. Chapter 10, The Prince of Echoing Dreams. Far beyond the darkened woods and winding rivers, in a kingdom kissed by golden hills, a young prince dreamed of a girl he had never met. Each night, her face came to him in sleep, eyes like moonlight, lips like roses, a voice that echoed like wind through leaves. She never spoke a word, but he woke each morning with the ache of knowing she was real, somewhere. Prince Elias was no ordinary nobleman. He had no taste for grand feasts or empty courtly games. Instead, he often rode alone, following stars and songs, listening to whispers carried by the wind. One morning, as he walked the garden, a bluebird landed on his shoulder. It looked into his eyes, then flew toward the horizon. He felt a pull in his heart, a tug stronger than logic. With nothing but his sword and a quiet urgency, he rode into the unknown. Days passed. He crossed rivers, climbed rocky trails, and wandered through sleepy villages. Everywhere he went, he asked about a girl with skin like snow and lips like blood. Most shrugged. But one old woman, outside a bakery, nodded. The woods beyond the veil. Strange things live there. But I've heard tales of a girl, dead, yet not. Sleeping in a glass tomb. The prince's heart pounded. He thanked her and galloped into the forest, deeper and deeper, where the light dimmed and the trees grew thick with silence. Then, he saw them. 7 small figures, gathered around a glowing glass coffin in a sun-dappled clearing. And inside, her. The girl from his dreams. The dwarfs looked up, startled. Bramble stepped forward, wary. Who are you? Elias dismounted slowly. I don't know why, but I've seen her. In dreams. I've come to find her. Please, may I approach? Bramble studied the prince's eyes, clear, kind, and filled with awe. He nodded. The prince stepped to the coffin. His breath caught. She's even more real than I imagined. He reached forward, gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. The moment his fingers touched her skin, a warmth bloomed through him. Without thinking, he bent down and placed a soft, reverent kiss on her forehead. Silence. Then, Snow White gasped. Her chest rose. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and full of confusion and recognition. You, she whispered, sitting up slowly. I've seen you, before. Elias could barely breathe. In dreams. The forest burst into song. Birds soared, and the trees rustled like applause. The dwarfs shouted with joy, embracing each other. Bramble's eyes welled up. Snow White turned to them all and smiled through tears. I'm awake. And for the first time in weeks, the forest felt alive again. Chapter 11, The Throne Reclaimed. The next morning, the forest dawned with golden light and songs of joy. Snow White, alive and radiant, walked hand in hand with Prince Elias as the 7 dwarfs followed close behind. Word of her awakening spread quickly, riding on the wings of birds and whispers of the wind. But far away in the castle of cold mirrors and sharp shadows, the queen's joy had curdled into rage. Her mirror no longer showed her as the fairest. Instead, it shimmered with a vision she thought destroyed. Snow White, eyes bright, cheeks kissed by life, rising like hope itself. No, the queen snarled, striking the mirror. She lives? She dares return? Snow White, meanwhile, knew what she had to do. She couldn't hide in the forest any longer. The kingdom deserved to know the truth. The people deserved a queen with a kind heart, not a cruel tongue. And so, with Elias beside her, and the dwarfs escorting her like loyal knights, she made the journey back to the castle, the place of her birth, of her mother's lullabies, of memories buried beneath stone and silence. The castle gates were shut. But when the guards saw her, really saw her, they dropped their weapons in awe. Some wept. The true queen returns, they whispered. Snow White entered the grand hall. The queen waited atop the throne, lips curled, crown crooked. So, the little ghost dares to walk again. Snow White stood tall. You banished me. You tried to destroy me. But I lived, and I return, not with hatred, but with truth. The queen laughed coldly. Truth? The only truth that matters is power. But the people, gathered now in the hallways, began to speak. She was always kind. She helped my daughter when she was ill. She never looked down on anyone. Their voices swelled. Snow White didn't raise her hand. She didn't shout. She simply stepped forward, radiant with gentleness, and said, Power fades. Beauty fades. But goodness endures. The queen screamed and lunged, one final strike of jealousy. But Elias moved swiftly, blocking her with his sword. The queen stumbled back, her power unraveling like threads. In a final moment of fury, she tried to call upon her magic. But the mirror behind her cracked. Then shattered. With a scream, the queen vanished into her own reflection, trapped in the shards of her own vanity. The room fell silent. And then the people knelt. Snow White was crowned under the golden sun, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it, with grace, humility, and strength of spirit. Chapter 12, A Kingdom in Bloom. The crown, once heavy with sorrow and stained with shadows, now gleamed with warmth atop Snow White's brow. The people rejoiced, not just because a rightful ruler had returned, but because goodness had finally found its voice on the throne. The palace transformed in days. The dark drapes were drawn open. The halls filled with music and the scent of fresh blooms. The garden, long left wild and withered under the queen's rule, was lovingly restored. Apple trees now blossomed with sweetness instead of fear. Snow White didn't rule from a pedestal. She walked among the people, listened to their worries, and shared in their joys. She introduced new festivals, rebuilt schools, and filled the libraries with stories, many told by the dwarfs, who now lived as beloved guests within the castle grounds. As for Elias, he remained by her side, not as a man seeking a crown, but as one who believed in her light. Their love blossomed gently, rooted in friendship and nourished by respect. The 7 dwarfs, once solitary miners, were now advisors and storytellers, their home in the forest protected forever as a place of legend. Snow White would often return to that forest, to the clearing where the glass coffin had once rested. She would touch the old stones and whisper thanks to the trees, the birds, and fate itself. Because she knew her story could have ended with fear. But instead, it ended with courage. With love. With life. And so, the kingdom bloomed, not just in petals and vines, but in hearts and minds. Snow White ruled for many years, wise and beloved. Her tale was passed from one generation to the next, not as a story of a sleeping girl, but of a young woman who woke up, stood tall, and changed her world. And every time a child heard the tale, they'd remember. It's not how a story begins. It's how you rise when it nearly ends.